I get asked quite a bit, how did I get started with the electronics and start working in this manner? And I think I did go to the University of Victoria as an undergraduate, and when I was there, my instructor, Roland Brenner, told me about a piece that Chris Burden had done, the performance artist. And he described this piece, and I've looked for documentation to try and find it, because it actually was sort of one of those pieces that really influenced the way I thought about art. But I've never found any kind of record or documentation of it ever happening, so it might have been just something that Roland made up, which, knowing him in retrospect, he could have. But what the piece was that he was saying that Chris Burden had done this piece that in a blackened space where the viewer was expected to go into a small inner room and take off all their clothes and put some kind of technology on their body so they would be completely naked except for this piece of technology. Then they would enter into a second space that had absolutely no light. And what would happen is when they moved through space, if they came upon anybody else who was with no clothes on, only having this piece of technology, a buzzer would go off. And so as you were walking around, you wouldn't be able to see anybody, and the only way you would ever know that anybody was there was by this buzzer being sounded off, recognizing the presence of somebody else. So as an undergraduate student, hearing this story, it made me realize that you could use electronics in a non-traditional way and put it on the human body, and work with art in a way that I hadn't really thought about art before. That and here we go. Charles Ray. Charles came to the University of Victoria when I was in my third year and gave us a talk and showed us some of this work. Actually, the two on the bottom there he didn't show us because he hadn't done them yet. But he gave us a visiting artist lecture, and again, it was another one of those talks where when I saw I saw his practice and how he used the human body in sculpture in a kind of very sculptural way, it kind of changed the whole way I looked at art making and art practice. So these pieces, you can see, are kind of self-explanatory on the side there. And the piece with the table and that round black disc, what that was is that he would, when he was performing the piece, he would sit in the chair with that black disc, was actually two pieces of pipe with a welded front on them, and his head would go inside that. So if you can imagine his body stuck inside that black disc and his body sitting in that chair. These pieces really kind of influenced the way that I looked at sculpture. So those are kind of the two people whose ideas really affected the way that I approach art and art making. So I have to apologize also for the bad quality of these slides. I guess when you're kind of a student, you kind of travel around and you throw your slides into boxes and they get all scratched and mucked up. And I guess I should clean it up in Photoshop or something. But anyways, what this piece is this was a piece I did to graduate at the University of Victoria. And what was going on here was that I strapped 5 buzzers to my body. Each one had a tilt switch, a mercury tilt switch in it, and the mercury tilt switch made it so that the buzzer would be activated everywhere except for one very small spot when the buzzer was, or when the switch was held parallel to the ground in that one spot, it would shut it off. So I'd walk into the space with the sound buzzing, and it was a really intense sound. They were kind of these high frequencies, really annoying, kind of like the highest frequency of what I was putting out there, but there were 5 of them, so it was really intense. Then I would go and try and find the spot that would shut each one of the buzzers off, and it was a very awkward spot. Like, I wouldn't know ahead of time exactly where that spot was. So the piece would consist of me walking in, making this horrible sound. I would go and usually end up leaning against a wall because the ones on my feet, I'd have to like hold my feet in this awkward position to try and shut them off. And usually finding that spot, I would end up with these really strange, awkward poses and gestures. And what would happen is that the tension that had been created by the sound was then transformed into a tension that was withheld within my body. And I would hold that until I could hold the pose no longer. And when I held the pose no longer, I had to let go, and all the sound would come back, and then I'd walk out again. This was another piece I used with sound attached to my body. I had synthesizer chips, really early, like 70 synthesizer chips that made little dops and beep-boppy noises, and each one was controlled by different by switches on my fingers and on my head and on my feet. So how I would perform this piece is I looked up Tai Chi gestures, and I did 5 Tai Chi gestures, and the sounds that were created by those gestures were very arbitrary, so my body was in these arbitrary gestures. Then I would have experimented with the sounds beforehand, and I would pick 5 sounds that I really liked, or that sounded, would create the kind of atmosphere that I was looking for. And so then the sounds were very constructed and orchestrated, but the gestures then would be very arbitrary. So my body gestures would be controlled by what sounds I was trying to produce. When I was performing this piece, you know, it's that thing about context, trying to contextualize your work and making sure that when you put it in a context that it's being read correctly. I performed this on the streets in Victoria as part of a festival once, and as I was walking along the street, there was a camera, documenting the whole thing on the other side of the street. And while I was doing it, somebody went and grabbed me and decided that he was a little off balance and decided he was going to take me to the camera, and he was about to shove me in front across a street without looking or anything with traffic coming. And it scared me quite dramatically. And after that, I realized that I had to be really aware when performing exactly what the context of that of the performance was, because it could be read differently depending on where you placed it. In that same festival, I did this piece, then I did the one previous. So I walked along the street buzzing, and then I would stop and lean on lampposts and shut it off and whatnot. Somebody who I knew not terribly well, but who did know me, acquaintance, saw me performing, and I ran into her a couple of days later by accident. And she when I walked in and I wasn't disabled, she was really relieved. She thought, when she saw me on the street, she thought I'd had a terrible accident, and these buzzers were like controlling my body, and that I'd kind of escaped from hospital or something. But I actually had really caused her a lot of distress, because she said, one, I was really concerned for you, and then when I couldn't come up to you because you were just too bizarre, then I felt guilty for days, because I was sitting here thinking, oh, she's had this horrible accident, and I didn't go and find out what's happened, and I just abandoned her. So it really did teach me a lesson really early on about that whole idea of how to frame your work in a way to make sure that the framing actually makes it say what you want to say and talk about the issues that you want it to talk about. I sort of was dealing a lot, or working a lot with, actually I think this slide is, yeah, I was going to put these backwards. I'll go back to that one. This piece I did at UCLA, and I had a conflict. When I first started performing, I actually really hated it. I thought I was, I stressed out so much about it and everything. I was constantly trying to get my body out of my work. And then every time I got my body out, I would think, well, gee, it's kind of boring. I don't actually get to do anything. So then I put my body back in. So in some of these pieces, you'll see that I'm kind of dealing with some of the same ideas, and sometimes I'm putting my body in, and then I'm bringing it out, and I'm putting it back in again. And this piece, I started off with the body out, my body out anyway. But what I do is often, because I wanted my body out, I would put the viewer's body in instead of mine. So in this particular piece, what I did was I put, again, I really like using high frequency, horrible sounds as a way of driving people to try and stop them. So there's like 20 photocells with each one connected to a circuit. Again, it's very similar to the mask, except for there's 20 there. That was one. So you can imagine it's really loud and really horrible. What would happen is that I'd put it in a certain form that the only way you could turn them all off and shut the thing off completely was if you stood on this little table and made the gesture that mimicked the gesture that I'd set up on the wall. So the piece would look like it does on your left, and then you would stand up like you do on the right, and then when your shadow fell over that shape, you would shut them all off, and then you would earn yourself the reward of peace and quiet. But of course, you end up standing on a table kind of like this, which wasn't much fun. And again, it was that whole idea of control, of who is controlling what, that I was interested in. Well, so I'd worked it out so I didn't have to use my body, but as I said, I kept on, going back and forth. So there, I thought really it was a good piece that way, but it'd be better this way. So what I did was I put all those circuits on my body. And in order for the viewer to shut all the sounds off from my screaming body, because now there's 20 high-frequency circuits all screaming from my body, if you stood at my feet, your shadow then would fall on top of my body, and that would shut them off, which I thought was really, I thought I was being really clever until one day when I went and was asked to perform back at U Vic to be a visiting artist there. And I said, well, instead of giving a lecture, why don't I just do a series of performances? And they said, okay, that would be fine. So I started off with this piece. And after about 30 seconds of the piece, somebody came out of the audience, and instead of standing at my feet doing what I had expected they would do, they grabbed my feet and they dragged me across the floor out of the square of light and shut them off that way. But of course, it wasn't quite what I planned. And then I was lying there going, okay, so now do I wiggle back into this? Or, so it was a bit of a quandary. I decided to just lie there to see what happens, and so then time sort of passed, and I'd given instructions to the person who was controlling the spotlight that was on my body that after a certain period of time they should just pull the plug and then I would stand up and walk out. And since the piece wasn't going the way that I had described it, the person decided to short circuit the whole thing and pulled the plug early, and I was able to get up and walk out, and that was the end of the piece. Oops. Sorry, I have to, yep. Okay, then there was, so right after I did that piece, I decided I would do this piece. And this piece was, this mask isn't like the mask that I just showed you. This mask puts out a beep, a constant beep. It isn't controlled by light at all. It's set at a certain frequency, so it just goes, like that. And if you look in the second slide, you can kind of see the outline of kind of a head of wires. Well, that head of wires was a sound-sensitive switch that controlled a little truck that was at the bottom. Now, the idea of this piece was that I would walk up to that wire head, and when the wire head heard me going, it would activate the truck that was underneath, and the truck would then scoot away and move away from me until it got about 2 or 3 feet away, and then it was too far for the circuit to pick up the so it would stop, and then I would move up to it, and then it would go like this. And then the idea was it would hit the wall, and there was a switch in it that would reverse the whole system so that it would shoot at me. And then as soon as it came at me and it heard that it would stop, and then I would move 2 feet back. So it was like I chased it, it chased me. Well, on that same evening, after I just finished having the first piece kind of go awry, I thought, okay, second piece, straightforward. I'll walk straight out, we'll hit that wall, come back out. Fine, no problem. So I go out, everything's going well. We're going straight ahead. It's just about to hit the wall so it can reverse and come back. And not the person who'd grabbed my feet, but another person jumped out from the audience. It wasn't meant to be this participatory. I jumped out and took the little truck and moved it so it wouldn't hit the wall. And I thought, well, okay, now what? So then I kind of looked at the way they pointed it and I thought, okay, there's another wall over there. Okay, well, chase it to that wall. Now, you imagine this piece was meant to be like maybe 5 minutes long. I was supposed to go in and out, right? But I guess the first piece was cut short, so this one could go a little longer, I guess. So off I went, about to hit the wall again, and again she jumped out. And this went on for about 10 or 15 minutes. And so instead of being out and back, it was like me chasing around with this person coming out and protecting this little truck from hitting the wall. It wasn't quite what I planned. However, and afterwards, I spoke with the person who had done that, and she was somebody who had been like in first year when I'd been in my 4th year, so she kind of knew me. And she said, well, I felt so badly about what happened in the first piece, and I was afraid if it hit the wall, it might hurt your truck. So she was actually trying to like protect the truck and take on this sort of motherly possession of my toy, but not knowing how it worked. She didn't realize it was supposed to hit the wall. So she actually became a part of the performance without my plan anyway. So it turned out to be completely different. And I think that's part of what I've learned about performing is performing and doing anything with electronics where there's an expectation that you expect the viewer to actually do or behave in a specific way. You can never count on people doing what you think they're going to do. It just doesn't work. So oh, that's another one. So this was another piece that I did with similar trucks. In this one, what I'd do is I'd start off placing 6 trucks in a circle. And these ones were voice activated, but I used my own voice, and I'd start off at low frequencies, and 1 or 2 of them would start to move like this. They were set, so they would just go back and forth. And so the idea is that I had sort of control in placing them in a very regimented circle. And then as my voice got louder and louder, and then more of them started activating, coming towards me, that kind of sense of order got broken down into a kind of sense of disorder. Sort of was the, okay. No, sorry, I'm doing it because my slides kind of got mixed up. This was a piece back, this is back at UCLA again, where I decided that I kind of like that idea of creating tension in space using sound. So in this piece what I did was I attached, okay, this is another one of those things do not do. Do not attach 6 car horns to your face. Okay, I got another way of not doing it. Do not do it underneath the UCLA library. Having 6 car horns under a library is not a good idea, especially when you're trying to shut them off by having this extraordinary weird face, because you're sitting there working, trying to shut them off, and then of course the librarian comes down, and the librarian isn't very happy. And so she starts to try and gives you a huge lecture, and of course by that time you've got them all shut off and your face is all like distorted and you're holding them as hard as you can, and she's asking you what you're doing, and of course you can't explain, because if you say anything you're going to set them all off again. The other reason why this is not a good idea is it's not a good idea to put 12 volts from a car battery across your face. Unless, of course, you want to walk around with red welts all over your face for a couple of weeks and you look really stupid. So anyway, so there's a couple of sculptural do's and don'ts. Here what I've done is this is actually a radio. And when people sort of ask you how you come up with ideas and things like that, sometimes you come up with your ideas, they're just sort of, they come out of the material that you're working with. And how this happened was I was working, I thought it might be an interesting idea to have an amplifier on your face, and maybe when you spoke softly you could like boom it out. So I was working with a circuit that was an amplifier circuit, and I was trying really hard to try and get it to work, and I was working on it all day. Couldn't get it to work. My partner at the time was, when I'd gone to graduate school, he'd gone to technical school, so it was really useful. So when he came home and I'd been working on it all day, I said, can you look at it, because I can't seem to get it to work. So he took what I'd done, and he plugged the battery in, and he just started to pull pieces off to see what would happen as he pulled it out. And when he pulled one of the parts that I'd put in out, all of a sudden he heard the radio. So he called me and he says, this thing is picking up the radio. And he says, well, I can fix that. I'll build this filter and that filter. And I'm going, no, it's okay. You don't have to build filters. I'll use it as a radio. That sounds like a great idea. So I had a radio on my face. The radio was actually, see how my arms are? My arms are actually I'm holding onto wires that were actually the antenna. And so how the performance would go is when I walked into the space, I usually went to the space beforehand, and I would walk around the space because it was a really sort of bad radio in that it might pick up a station here but not pick it up there. So I would go into the space and I'd find a really hot spot for the radio in the space. So I would walk into the space with my arms folded, just slowly open my arms up, and as I slowly opened my arms up, you'd slowly start hearing the radio coming through. And then I would just rotate my body, and as I turned my body and the antenna would face different radio stations would come in and out as I circled around, and then I would just slowly put my arms back together and then walk out of the space, and that was the piece. I was asked to do the piece at Banff, and in Banff I realized, well, there's no radio stations, that you can get. The mountains block all the signals. So I thought, well, that's going to be kind of hard for my piece. So what I did was I made another mask, and I decided I would perform with a male performer, and I would make my male performer at the radio station. So this piece, it's called She Receives, He Transmits. And so that he's actually, his mask is the transmitter and my mask is the receiver. And the way I've done it is a really, it's a really sort of his crappy transmitter. The only way that you can actually hear what he's transmitting would be as if our arms actually lined up together. So when our arms are in parallel, you can hear what's being transmitted from his mouth, so you can hear the sound coming out of my mask. And when our arms go out of sync, then you can't hear it anymore. So we would do a series of sort of signals to each other, and when we got it together, you would hear it. And when we went out of sync, you wouldn't. This is kind of a bad slide, but I've sort of cobbled all the things that I've done that are more performance orientated together. So this was done actually not that long ago relative to the other ones. And what this was this is a piece that I did in, I did it with Art Engine, which is a group in Ottawa that takes artists and they match them with corporate people who have skills. So what this piece, so I did this in collaboration with them. They built a website that you could go on and draw just using simple lines. And then when you pushed a button, it would upload it to, when it was being performed, it would upload it to where I was. So I would have a video projector, and I would stand in front of the video projector, and then people at home could draw with this template. And every time they pushed the button and sent the drawing up onto the video projector, the people in that space would see it, and depending on where the lines of their drawing fell on my body would determine the sound that was being created, because I was using the same circuit that I've used, that I've just demonstrated with my mask. So the sound was all being controlled by people outside of the space, and the sound was affecting, well, there was a visual effect and as well as an acoustic effect. So this is me getting out of my work again. So even though both those pictures are me, the pieces were set up for anybody to be the performer in these pieces. So what would happen? The one on your left was actually the piece I did to graduate from UCLA. The scale here is those are. Each one of those fans is about this big, the round part on them. They were each put into a pipe that was that big with a big fan on it and legs on it. When you put your head in the helmet and moved your head back and forth, the mechanism in the middle there would bounce up and down and hit a whole series of switches based on there was a wheel of plexiglass that would slap them at different rates. And so these fans would be going on and off and blowing air into the space. In order to get into the space, you had to walk right in front of these fans. So if anybody was operating the piece, you'd be affected by being blown at by the person using the piece. And then after that, I did a piece that was somewhat similar, but not exactly the same, at the Western Front, where you put your head, the viewer put their head in a helmet, moved it back and forth, and when they moved their head back and forth, it would turn on these little box fans that were inside the cages, and so the fans inside the cages were like crazed animals or something. They'd be banging around trying to get out because they were being suspended by at one spot up high. So this idea of a gesture affecting a kind of mechanical thing that then affected something electrical was sort of a start of a series that I did. But then again, I had to put my body back into it. So putting my body back in meant that what I did this time was I started to hang myself. Sort of more kind of literally as well as figuratively. I put all four of these slides in because I thought you were students, you might like to see sort of my process in creating an installation. Installation is really hard because one thing, it's often really dependent upon the site to which you're installing. And so things really can change, and the look of them can change based on where you're actually physically putting it up. So the first first one on the far left, that's actually in my studio and was the first time I didn't show it. I just sort of, that's my sketch there on the left. So when I first did it, I was only a couple inches off the ground. And there were 8 circuits around the space. So actually, I should describe what's going on, because what's happening is that the viewer is asked to move their head back and forth. Their head going back and forth pulls on a string that's connected to a wheel mechanism in the center, and that wheel mechanism starts to go back and forth, and what that does is it causes me to swing back and forth. And when I swing back and forth, I have a little helmet with a little stick on it, and in front of that stick is a switch, and I can't touch the switch by myself. I can't physically get to the switch, but when the viewer starts to move their head back and forth and I start to swing, my head starts to hit the switch. And the switch is attached to these little, the circuit that's in that mask is called an oscillator circuit. And you can, as well as having the frequency range, you could hear how it was clicking. At some points it was clicking, and at other points it was screaming, squealing really loudly. Well, you can adjust it and set it at different frequencies. So the first time I did it, I had 8 circuits in a circle, and so when you moved your head back and forth, it would turn them on, more and more on, the more you used your head. When I did it the second time, this was in Winnipeg at Plug-In, and this is, I was telling the story of how I was hanging in a space, and when I first started to show these pieces, I thought, oh, I'll get in the piece every hour on the hour and hang in them for 20 minutes, and then and I'll do that for a week while the show's up. Well, when I did it in Winnipeg in this place, this was a space that was right above the regular gallery space, and they were just about to take it over and renovate it. And before they renovated it, they asked me if I'd like to show my work there. So I went and did this performance here. But what it meant was that somebody had to come from downstairs with a little ladder to help me get in and out of the piece. And as you can imagine, every hour on the hour, they remembered to put me in. Unfortunately, they forgot to take me out. So I got stuck hanging up there. And while I was hanging up there, I was thinking to myself, I don't think I'm going to do it this way ever again. This just doesn't work. So after that, I came up with a different system. And the system I came up with was to actually hang in it for an hour during the opening and videotape the hour opening. And then once it was videotaped, I would put the clothing with a monitor with the tape playing. So the piece really only existed for that hour while the opening was on, and then after that it really became sort of like the residue of the performance and documentation. But you can see as time progressed, I got higher and higher off the ground. The piece on the left side is in Holland at a gallery called De Fabrique, and this is it at the Banff Centre, the one at the bottom on the right. I did 3 pieces where I suspended myself. This one you kind of pulled on the handles, kind of like you were milking a cow, and that would cause me to swing back and forth like this. Every time I swung back and forth, I would hit a switch on either side of me. And when I did that, there was a circuit. You can kind of see that mess of wires that's at the far end. It was actually a circuit that was counting how many times I would swing back and forth, and it was counting me binarily, which means that it was counting with zeros and one. This is in Winnipeg, and when I was doing it, there's all these people around and everything like that, and I'm looking to the ground. When I perform these pieces, people quite often come up to me and try and talk to me. And I usually don't, well, not usually, I don't answer them. I don't speak when I'm performing. And I got one guy when I was sitting there hanging like this, I'm sitting there looking at the ground, and all of a sudden this big face comes down underneath and is looking up at me, and I'm going, ooh. And this guy says, hi, I'm the janitor. I have to clean the floor in the morning. Are you still going to be hanging here? And he goes, So I didn't answer, and he goes, you're not answering. Still no answer, and he goes, I guess I'll have to find somebody else. And then he comes out and goes off and asks somebody if I'm going to be hanging around it in the morning. This is, oops, this is the third one. And here, when you push the little truck around and around, it would wind me up. And when I got wound up, I'd hit the ceiling, and it would change the lighting in the space if I hit the ceiling. Then it was, and you were told that if as soon as there was a change in sound, you were to turn the truck around and wind me down. And when you wound me down, I'd hit a switch on the bottom, which would change the sound in the space. So you wound me up, you got a lighting change, and if you wound me down, you got sound change. So it was sort of this process of going up and down. I was commissioned to do a piece in Pittsburgh at the mattress factory, and what I did was I talked to people in the neighborhood, 4 people, and I set up. If you look sort of through the door, that's also part of this piece. What I did was I recorded 4 people talking about the neighborhood. Each one was recorded around that table in the spot where the monitor is and their head was. And I would just ask them to give me stories about the neighborhood. So they were each talking. But when you walked into that room, there was no sound. You actually couldn't hear anything. You could see their mouths moving, but you didn't hear any sound. If you wanted to hear the sound, you had to put this sort of crazy contraption on. And when you walked around the space, there was, depending on who was talking, there were like pools of sound of where you would pick up the sound that was being broadcast from the sound next door. So I always think of this sort of was like, what do you call those sticks where you're looking for water? Yeah, like a divining rod. It was sort of like a sound of divining rod. You're sort of walking around the space, sort of divining, trying to find the one spot that would give you the information of what was going on in the conversation in the room next door to you. These are a series of. I've been doing these things called sound drawings for the last little while, and what it is that I discovered by using that same circuit that I used with the mask, I figured out, or didn't figure out, I saw in I have a hero, it's Forrest M. Mims III, and Forrest, in a book on sensors, showed how you could make what's called a bend sensor using graphite, and so it dawned on me that, hey, graphite actually conducts electricity. So in these drawings, what I did, or what I do, because I'm still sort of doing them in a number of configurations, is I put the circuit on a piece of paper. I have 2 copper strips, and I take a graphite pencil, and I usually start the piece by performing it as a performance, where I go around the space, drawing, connecting the 2 copper strips with a graphite line, and depending how thick the graphite line is, determines the frequency of sound that's being created by the circuit. So this was done in San Francisco just in June, and I had 10 circuits around a space, and the performance took about 20 minutes. And then after I finished performing, I put the pencils and erasers down on the drawings, and I invite the viewers to start to draw. So everybody starts drawing, and you make it go by drawing, but you make it stop by erasing. So there's always an eraser with the pencil. And I actually have, that's how it looks that's how it looked. I did it in Calgary as well, and when there were only 3 of them. And, whoops. Sorry. I'm just going to go to my website for just a second, because I also made a recording using them, and I actually did a little bit of a composition, but used them as the way I made it. So the sound you're about to hear is 4 of the sound drawings sitting on my kitchen table with me with a pencil and eraser manipulating them. So I think it's only like 3 minutes long, so I'll just play that and then. Oh, sorry, just a sec. It started before it's, okay, there. You have to hear the scribble part. So I'll just talk about one more piece, and then I'll be enough. I'll just show you what I've, the last, most recent thing I've been working on is a piece called Audio Quilt. I did a residency at the Roundhouse Community Center. I spent about 6 months to a year sort of becoming part of that community. I joined the ping pong club. So I made art while playing ping pong. Because I wanted people to recognize me, and so I could talk to people in the community at the community center, and they'd kind of have a sense of who I was. So what I did was I made these four quilts, and each quilt contained 20 speakers. Each speaker was connected to a 10-second sound chip, and the sound chip was activated by the shadow. So when you stood in front of the quilt, when you stood in front of it, it would activate a cluster of recordings, and depending on where you stood and how you interacted with it would depend on what sound you would get back from it. So I don't know if I'll play all this, but I'll play a little bit of this just to give you an idea of how it worked. A little loud, sorry. Well, that kind of gives you a bit of an idea. There were 4 quilts. One had voices with me asking people, like going around talking to people about their relationship to the community centers. So it had little sound bites of people saying things. Well, I really like coming here because of the exercises. I like the atmosphere here because of this, that. So one was voices answering the question, kind of what's your relationship to the community center. The other one was just not arbitrary sounds that I had collected on the interior space, things like the printer, from the office, the dance class, just sounds that the building made and people made within that building, but not necessarily voices. The other one was sounds from outside, traffic, just the general ambient sound from just around the outside of the community center. And then the last one, I actually sort of performed the piece because I would sit in the piece for a certain time period every day while the exhibition was on, and I'd ask people where they thought they'd be, people from the community, where they would be in 10 years. And when they gave me an answer, I would upload it into one of the squares. So one of the quilts, the voices would change sort of daily as I put new voices or added voices to the quilt. And I think I'll end on that note.